Just a quick note before I get into everything here. There's the potential for some challenging topics, if for some in this episode, revolving around discussions of weight through 1965 media coverage. I want to be fully transparent. I'll provide time code, but it should be right around the middle of the episode. Now, on to the show. Well, friends, sit down, grab your TV dinner, and get cozy. Welcome to Piercing Pop Culture. As usual, my name is Kim, your resident classic entertainment nerd with a penchant for classic TV. I was a Nick at Night kid. Nick at Night. Who out there remembers block party summers? Between Nick at Night and this block of shows that ranged from My Favorite Martian to Happy Days in the Morning when I stayed home from school, there's a reason why I am the way I am. Not to toot my own horn or anything, but I'm always intrigued when a show comes along that I'm not familiar with. This week, I'm sitting down to talk about a subject that I started hyping way back in the year that was 2020. One of the many, many, many shows which got me through lockdown was a little series called Broadside. I'd never heard of it before stumbling onto YouTube, that is. This episode is going to be a love letter to YouTube, so get yourself ready. Once I got over the disappointment of Broadside only running a single season, I threw myself into it and fell in love. It's an interesting little show, and I do think it's worthy of a lot more attention than it receives. So let's take some time to sit down and talk about Broadside. Broadside follows a troop of waves who find themselves stationed as members of a motor pool on an island in the South Pacific. The only problem is their commanding officer, convinced that a group of girls on his island will only ruin the cushy lifestyle he's worked so hard to get himself through the war. Watching the show, Broadside can best be described what happens when you roll McHale's Navy and Sergeant Bilko into a big ball. The series did come from producer Edward Montaigne, best known for his work on McHale's Navy. While this synopsis doesn't sound all that unique, what jumps out in watching this show is the novelty of the series is not only fronted by women, but a military comedy at that. Give me one where they aren't nurses. I'll wait. The show starred Kathleen Nolan, who was best known to audiences at the time thanks to her ongoing role in The Real McCoys, which aired between 1957 and 1963 on ABC.
Want you to meet the family known as The Real McCoys. That's Grandpappy Amos, the head of the clan. He roars like a lion, but he's gentle as a lamb. And now here's Luke, who beams with joy since he made Mrs. Luke McCoy.
In the years to follow, Nolan would make history as the first woman elected as the president of the Screen Actors Guild. Nolan was a staple on television, beginning with her earliest work in the beginning of the 1950s through the early 2000s when she appeared on television series like Chicago Hope, Ally McBeal, and Crossing Jordan. During these 50 years, she appeared, usually in single episode arcs, in some of the most well-known classic shows on television. Nolan is a figure who, to be honest, somehow avoided my classic TV consciousness for far too long. Those of you who are fans of classic actresses, and I know there are plenty of you out there, do me a favor and dive a little bit into her TV work. I don't want to stray too much from the subject at hand here, but the writing about her during her 2 terms as the Screen Actors Guild president resulted in some legendary quotes. I'm honestly probably going to have to give her her own episode here at some point. Nolan is quoted in the Los Angeles Times in an article dated November 9th, 1979. She says, "We have long known that women in our industry are underemployed. Of 47,000 members in SAG, close to half are female, and last year only 400 of those, less than 2%, earn more than $10,000 at their craft." Talking about Kathleen Nolan on screen doesn't feel like it gives her the credit she really deserves. In all the research I've done on her life and career, her tenacity and passion never fails to inspire. She's a fierce and tenacious figure who cares about more than simply the art of making movies. She cares about the communities populating the industry. Nolan is quoted in September 7th, 1972 issue of the Lexington Herald. "We set up discussions with men in the industry and give them solid information against stereotypes, for instance. Why always portray nurses as young blondes when figures show that most are actually 45 years or older? With millions of women preferring to be homemakers, how can you show them as a single stereotype? Dumb and oversexed. Nolan was elected to the head of the Screen Actors Guild in 1976 with, according to the Pensacola News-Journal on February 10, 1976, 54.4% of the vote. This was, according to the article, more than the other 4 candidates combined. Nolan's predecessor in the role was Gunsmoke star Dennis Weaver. That's right, Chester. However, a list of the previous presidents is a who's who of Hollywood talent, featuring names like John Gavin, Dana Andrews, James Cagney, Ronald Reagan, and Robert Montgomery. Perennial Kim favorite William Schallert would succeed Nolan in 1979. Kathleen Nolan is still with us today at the age of 92. Classic TV fans out there should also recognize fellow Broadside cast members Sheila James Cool as Selma Kowalski. Cool, who also enjoyed a lengthy political career after stepping away from acting, made a name for herself on The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, playing the delightfully spunky and, dare I say, relatable Zelda Gilroy.
Zelda, I know why you're here, and flake off.
I only came to wish you many, many years of happiness, fellas.
Zelda.
And I just happen to have with me a copy of Dobie's latest grades.
Look, Zelda.
Which, as you will notice, were the top grades in the bottom 10th of the class.
Zelda, cut out, will you?
You're a very lucky girl, Phyllis. Here's the results of his latest intelligence test. Also, a sample of his handwriting and a picture of his father, your future father-in-law.
Dobie, this is your father?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
And it's an old picture.
Taken when he was young?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Phyllis. Phyllis Gillis. That will be your name, Phyllis Gillis.
This cast is a veritable who's who for those of us who love classic TV. Dick Sargent, better known as Darren Number 2, appears as the adorable resident love interest, Lieutenant Maxwell Trotter, while George Firth is utterly memorable as Ensign Beasley. Those who keep watching deep into the first season will be treated to Arnold Stang and a delightful turn as Stanley Stubbs, a frustrated Navy cook turned paramour for Kowalski. Yes, it is as great as it sounds. Heck, there's plenty of blink-and-you-miss-it performances deep in the show from up-and-comers like Robert Pine, Roger Perry, William Smith, Artie Johnson, and Jamie Farr. The series ran for a single season between 1963 and 1964 on ABC. I had admittedly never heard of this series, and looking at the TV lineup at the time, I hate to say it, but it's easy to understand why. The show aired on Sunday nights at 8:30. It had a solid lead-in with the long-running Western Wagon Train. However, do you know what aired Sunday nights between 8 and 9? This guy.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, yes, that's right.
Pretty big shoe himself. What also happened in 1964 on this guy's show? I'll give you a hint. They were 4 adorable mop tops who spearheaded the British invasion. While this isn't a deep dive into the lineup in 1964, it's immediately clear that this show didn't really have a chance. NBC saw the same problems across the dial in the time slot with the Bill Dana Show and then Branded struggling against Ed Sullivan. Series star Kathleen Nolan is quoted in a Daily News article dated February 7th, 1965. She said, "I enjoy being pitted opposite Ed. It's exciting fighting an institution. It gives me more satisfaction than competing with a howdy-doody type show. We're not trailing Ed by too much, and I'm very pleased with our ratings." Interestingly, a look at the press clippings on the show makes clear that the show was canceled for low ratings. Nolan is quoted in the Ithaca Journal on June 5th, 1965. She says, "I'm still in the dark. All they gave me was mumbo-jumbo about a new look for the network. Maybe the Navy didn't like the show, but I'm sure they understood we did everything with tongue-in-cheek, just as they're doing on Gomer Pyle, USMC. If the Marines don't complain, why should the Navy?" Interestingly, I found a lot of hostility towards the show as I began diving into its press clips, particularly from the Navy themselves. The Daily News out of New York, in their issue dated February 7th, 1965, quotes a Navy spokesperson. "Frankly, we'd like to fire a broadside at Broadside. Everyone on the show acts like an idiot. The male officers especially are depicted as damn fools. It certainly isn't a funny show, and it certainly doesn't bring any credit to the Navy." It seems the critics and the Navy weren't that far apart. An article in the Pittsburgh Press hits the show after its opening in an article dated the 21st of September, 1964. The critic writes, "I don't know about Broadside, The great expectations were there. What with Kathy Nolan over the telephone and Edward Andrews in person telling me the past week how great the show would be. But alas, in a word, it wasn't. This was a show. Ouch. Now comes that challenging subject matter I mentioned. Cultural criticism alert. You have been warned. So this review was a review. The writer goes on about Kathleen Nolan. Kathy hasn't changed much from her old Kate McCoy role, which lasted 5 years. There are two differences, however. Now she has a slim, trim panatella of a figure, and she calls herself Kathleen. Only aspect of her old Kate role retained was the least solid of the assets, her whiny voice. Lieutenant Anne Morgan is certainly a looker, though.
Flames on the side of my face.
Looking at the articles, there's a lot of references to Nolan's wade throughout the early promotion of the show. You'd think she was a heifer, the way they write about her in The Real McCoys. The Daily News article continues with this. When the actress starred in The Real McCoys, she weighed a hefty 127 pounds. Today, Kathy is 30 pounds lighter. Nolan says, "I'm starving to death. I can't weigh more than 97 pounds because of the tight uniforms I have to wear." Now, I can't begin to express the issues going on here. However, we don't have to dig too deep into this. We know exactly what's going on here. Kathleen Nolan is a woman. Many articles routinely make comparisons between Broadside to McHale's Navy, with the show being accurately described as cousins. Though, I have yet to find an article discussing legendary Oscar winner Ernest Borgnine's weight as news items for the series. Ultimately, this show works for me precisely for the unique toll of having a narrative driven purely by women. Sure, the humor is a bit broad, and this is often cited as a struggle for the series. However, in presenting these waves on the front lines, the series is telling the story that wasn't told quite in this way. We see women who don't fit into the cookie-cutter image women were supposed to fit at this time. They're getting dirty. They're causing a bit of mischief. And what is most important is they're looking at the men around them. They're gazing at and sexualizing the men around them just as much as the sailors are looking back at them. Broadside isn't the only series in the 1964-1965 lineup which spotlights women in the cast. A quick look over the listing shows series like Bewitched, The Donna Reed Show, alongside deeper cuts like The Cara Williams Show, Karen, Glynis, and Wendy and Me. However, the differentiation here is that these are very domestic sitcoms, which by and large feel very standard to the television industry. After all, Lucille Ball first graced television screens as Lucy Ricardo almost 15 years before in 1951. Gertrude Berg similarly toplined The Goldbergs in 1949. And Mary Kay Stearns starred in Mary Kay and Johnny as far back as 1947. Women had been coming to the forefront in the domestic space on television really since TV was a thing. In Broadside, though, the emphasis isn't on the domestic sphere. As members of the motor pool, the Waves are occupying a traditionally masculine role during a war which we don't often see a woman's story explored, unless they're on the home front or at the very most a battlefield nurse. The very root of Broadside's narrative pits the women of the motor pool against the Navy, personified by Adrian and Beasley. While Broadside's cousins, Sergeant Bilko and McHale's Navy, have plots that revolve around the respective units trying to scheme their way through the war and their befuddled superiors trying to keep control, the women of Broadside are just trying to do their jobs. There's a little mischief, but most revolve around the women trying to stay ahead of the buffoonish Commander Adrian, who is convinced that the presence of these women will ruin his cushy little war. It's Adrian's goal to get the troop of Waves deported back to the States. Captain Binghamton in McHale's Navy sure wants to send McHale and his men to the brig, but he's just trying to enforce order. In Andrew's hands, Adrian is a buffoon. It makes one wonder why the Navy had such a problem with the show. That's the extent of the intense cultural analysis. Now, Broadside was a doozy to find. Supposedly, there is a DVD out there, but I have not found it yet. I watched most of the show on YouTube. I'll leave a link to the page in the show notes. Now, is Broadside a perfect show? Of course not. Watching the run of the series, it feels a bit uneven. But like any show, especially in the day when a sitcom had to maintain an exhausting 30-episode run, some are great, while others are far from memorable. I had an absolute blast, especially when Arnold Stang enters the series right around episode 20. His presence is an important one in the narrative, as it gives the Waves a much-needed ally. While there are a few characters who flit in and out throughout the run of the show, the only regular who is on their side is Dick Sargent's Lieutenant Trotter. The pairing of Cool and Stang is probably the most fun in the series, aside probably from Adrian and Beasley. Cool brings a lot of the persona she crafted for herself during the run of The Many Loves of Dopey Gillis. In fact, if you like her in that show, you likely will enjoy her work in Broadside. For lack of a better word, Kowalski is man-crazy, and there's something so relatable about her. She's not a Hollywood bombshell. She's the girl you went to high school with. She's smart, she's savvy, and she's enjoying the heck out of being surrounded by so many men. So with that, it is a definite choice that she ends up paired with Arnold Stang, who plays as big of a character as Kowalski is. On an island filled with young, cute, and muscular sailors, Arnold Stang wears glasses. He speaks through his nose, and he probably weighs 100 pounds soaking wet. Yet he absolutely adores Kowalski.
Selma Kowalski.
Hi, Stanley.
Oh, I didn't know you were away. What are you doing here?
I'm stationed here.
No kidding. You work up around a car fast?
You two know each other.
Oh, we went to high school together. I always had a crush on Selma. Come on, gorgeous. Let's go get some breakfast or something.
I can't, Stanley. I have to report to Commander Adrian.
Report? Don't be about that little. It's just a misunderstanding. Could have happened to anyone. You two children run along. Run along.
Thank you, sir.
Gorgeous. We got a lot to catch up on.
You were saying about the Waves, sir.
Oh, bless every one of their little brass buttons.
Could she be seen as settling? Sure. However, they are the cutest couple. Broadside is plain and simply a mid-1960s situation comedy. These plots are, as you would expect, broad. The narrative follow-through is minimal, and since it only stuck around for one season, there really isn't much of a chance for any of the characters to go through development that isn't romantic. Though I did get plenty of laughs, especially when Sheila James Cool, Arnold Stang, and George Firth are on the screen. So, Broadside is a show that really came out of left field for me. You all know that I love looking at questions of gender and sexuality throughout the middle of the 20th century. So the fact that it took me till 2020 to discover this show still supremely disappoints me. Sure, it isn't perfect. However, I don't think it deserves the derision that it seems to get in the literature I've been able to dig up from the period. If you're a fan of McHale's Navy or even Sergeant Bilko, you might want to give this little show a chance. It's a fun sitcom and definitely worthy of love and attention. Switching gears, I'm adding another section this week. One of my primary goals in all of my dealings with film is the breaking down of gatekeeping in cinema. If nothing else, I want people to know that films are out there and darn it, anything is worth a shot. Of course, we all have those cinematic confessions. I'll tell you mine. My first deep dive into classic cinema started back when the first AFI, American Film Institute, Top 100 list came out. I made it my purpose to start watching as many of those movies as I could get my hands on. This leads me to the elephant in the rooms of quite a few cinephiles. I know what you're thinking, but no, it wasn't The Godfather. I liked that one from the first time I saw it. My dirty little secret is Citizen Kane. You know the one. It's chronically at the top of what seems like all the number one lists. It's been heralded as the greatest Hollywood film ever made. Friends, I fell asleep the first 3 times I tried watching Citizen Kane. I finally made it through on the 4th. Heck, I'm not even sure I can say I really actually appreciated the technical skill that others were saying until I rewatched it in adulthood. I still find it tremendously cold and have had the Rosebud reveal ruined by generations of pop culture jokes. I desperately want to play one here, but...
Spoilers.
Another example for me was Rebel Without a Cause. I watched the 1955 drama super young. I was probably 16, I think. I didn't get it.
Was it because we went to that party? Well, you know what kind of drunken brawls those kind of parties turn into. It's not a place for kids.
A minute ago, you said you didn't care if he drinks.
He said a little drink.
You're tearing me apart!
What?
You say one thing, he says another, and everybody changes back again!
I didn't understand it, and I really didn't like it. It was one of the worst movies I'd ever saw prior to that point. However, I rewatched it later, probably in college, and it struck a completely different chord for me. I fell in love with Rebel Without a Cause, and it's still one of my favorite movies. This is, I suppose, a long way of saying we should never write off any work of art. This relates to movies, TV, heck, even books. We're not going to like everything we take in. It's just the nature of being human. At the same time, though, my experience has been that just because you initially hated something, that won't necessarily always be the case. I don't even have to go into the deep philosophical arguments about the ever-changing nature of art. We, as human beings, are always changing. I was not the same person at 16 as I was when I was 25. By the very nature of the fact that we're always changing, it makes perfect sense that a film might elicit different responses from us at different points in life. Perhaps we're more grown up, or even something as simple as gaining life experience for something to hit differently. This is, perhaps, an overcomplicated way of saying, don't write anything off. Sure, you might hate it, but you never know if that'll ever change. As part of my desire to continue breaking down filmic gatekeeping, I'm going to bring in what I suppose is a recommendation section. There's no need to be intimidated by any movie. Take the plunge. You'll never know what you like. Over the year that has been 2025, I've had a blast experimenting with different streaming sites. While physical media is, yes, always the best decision, it's sometimes hard to take the plunge. Kids, I didn't give YouTube the respect it deserves. I know that now. I wrote it off as a weird little dumping ground. But for fans of the cult, the weird, and the schlocky, it is just the ticket. As long as you don't mind a few commercials, it is free. But the truth is, there are so many films on there. Thousands. And unlike the streamers, I'm looking at you, Netflix, there's actually some movies that are older than Jaws. In actuality, there's so many films on there, it's hard to make just one recommendations. Gentle listeners, we need to talk about X, Y, and Z. If you're searching for it on Letterboxd, you'll also see it called Zee and Co. It's currently available to watch over on YouTube.
Oh, my Bobby is drunk. Come on, baby.
You got what you wanted, didn't you? Well, I was drunk and out of my senses. Last night didn't mean a thing.
Oh, yes, it did. But you're too big a phony to admit it. Oh, baby, 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 it's you, baby, it's you.
Shut up!
This is Zee and her husband, Robert. For them, marriage is an intimate game in which cheating is sometimes allowed.
And you love it, you love it, love it. That's why you're still here. You love the uncertainty. You don't know what I did yesterday or where I went or who I was with.
I was pulled into this movie by Letterboxd reviews alone. User Sin calls it a wonderfully compelling catastrophe and then follows it up with 4 stars. User Nora calls it an early 70s free love mess. User Leia wrote a review with simply one word: lesbians. This was a movie I had to check out. Sticking with Letterboxd, here is the synopsis. The venomous and immoral wife of a wealthy architect tries any way she can to break up the blossoming romance between her husband and his new mistress. The trio in question is played by Elizabeth Taylor, Michael Caine, and Susanna York. This messy, chaotic Elizabeth Taylor performance might be one of my many new Roman empires, and considering this cast, it's surprisingly underviewed on Letterboxd. At the time of recording this has only been logged by 1.3 thousand people. I was diving deep into the IMDb trivia on this one, so take this with a grain of salt without further verification. It reports that the Michael Caine part was initially supposed to be played by Richard Burton. While I do consider myself a Richard Burton fan, I am secretly glad that Michael Caine was cast opposite Taylor here. Granted, I found his character probably the least entertaining, but hear me out. XYZ is, to put it bluntly, the trashy sister of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. If Burton had been cast in the role, the film would have undoubtedly struggled due to the unavoidable associations with the previous film. Though I would have paid money to see Peter O'Toole in the part, the actor who was reportedly the second choice. Watching this movie, I found myself blown away by Elizabeth Taylor's performance in a way that, shamefully, stuck with me a little more than Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. In her hands, Zee is a rollicking, chaotic mess. As I watched the film, I found myself constantly reminded of Taylor as she was during the studio system. She brought a class of otherworldly stardom to the screen that I would dare say few actors really quite equaled. Taylor came of age on screen with roles in films like Lassie Come Home and National Velvet, but never found herself caught in the child star trap. As the 1940s gave way into the 1950s and 1960s, she was the epitome of glamour and still iconic roles in movies like Cleopatra, Butterfield 8, and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. In XYZ, Taylor fearlessly dives into the depths of this character, seemingly unafraid to tinker with the intricacies of her star persona. She's not afraid to get her hands a little dirty. Now, I'm going to shy away from spoilers because I don't want to be that critic. But it is all the more fascinating to watch Taylor's messy performance because of one of the two possible ways to read the film's ending, which is actually disturbingly dark. That's probably as far as I should go there. With all that being said, I was really pulled into the film when Susanna York and Elizabeth Taylor were on screen together. These actresses achieve an intimate chemistry, and to be frank, there are scenes where York and Taylor are in a completely different movie than Kane. I was constantly reminded of the story that is told about 1959's Ben-Hur. Alright, I'm going to say urban legend alert. The story, as I've heard it recalled, is that Ben-Hur screenwriter Gore Vidal reportedly injected an unspoken subplot implying a romantic relationship between Masala, played by Stephen Boyd, and Ben-Hur, played by Charlton Heston. As the story is told, the only person who wasn't aware was Charlton Heston. While this is a story I've heard told through years, I have to say, allegedly to all of that. In XYZ, Michael Caine steps into the role of Charlton Heston, if we're following this analogy. He's in a drastically different movie than the two women. His character absolutely has no idea what's going on, leaving Elizabeth Taylor's Zee firmly in the driver's seat. Her work with York is magnetic. These women are having a blast playing off each other. The film stands on the shoulders of these sometimes wacky and messy performances. There were moments where I felt the narrative slowed down a bit too much. This, I suppose, happened when the story calmed down and everyone tried being a little more relatable. Ultimately, it's probably an issue with the variance in the tone. Those who aren't into, let's call it mess, will probably find this horrendously unlikable and unbearable to watch. Consider this your warning. Those who love mess, though, might find XYZ their new Roman Empire. As mentioned, XYZ is, at the time of recording at least, currently available on YouTube. So, we have a little time. At this point, I need to give a full disclosure. I'm painfully underviewed with Tobe Hooper. I say that because I sat down today to watch Eaten Alive, released 1976, streaming right now on Peacock.
Created by Tobe Hooper, maker of the screen sensation The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Marty Rustin presents a new horror classic, Eaten Alive. Into this house of terror comes a handful of unsuspecting innocents.
Hello?
What happens to these people in Eaten Alive will give you the most chilling, terrifying 90 minutes you ever spent in a theater.
Prior to this film, I believe I have seen 2 Hooper films. Oh, let's say 3. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but that was way back in college, and it's actually due for a rewatch, and Poltergeist and Salem's Lot probably way back in high school. So this was a new, fresh, first-time experience for me, and kids, this was a hoot in all the weird, slashery ways possible. And I remember having a similar experience with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't know if hoot is quite the right word, but hear me out. Before I get too much deeper, plot synopsis: a psychotic redneck, played by Neville Brand, who owns a dilapidated hotel in the backwater swamps of Louisiana, kills various people who upset him or his business, and he feeds their bodies to a large crocodile that he keeps as a pet in the swamp besides his hotel. As I said, directed by Tobe Hooper, and the cast here is Neville Brand, Mel Ferrer, Carolyn Jones, Marilyn Burns, Stuart Whitman, and a baby pre most things Robert Englund. So nailing this concretely into as a horror staple. Now, this was a fascinating watch, and I have a complicated relationship with certain slashers. It does not take a lot for them to become too intense for me, and this one was very close. But this walked so many lines. This was like Texas Chainsaw Massacre mixed in with some Roger Corman with a dash of like 70s exploitation thrown in. And don't take the Corman comparison as a bad thing. That's not how it's meant. I actually will bend the knee to Roger Corman any and every time. But the monster work in here was so precious. Neville Brand's crocodile alligator pet. Through most of the film, it's used to great effect. You don't see much of it, and in a situation like this, that's probably the most effective strategy. However, when you do, it's very clearly a toy. It's a practical effect, but it's very obviously fake. And my head went straight to the ping pong ball-eyed monsters of, Yor back in the 50s. And it is not that bad, but it's very easy to identify it as that. So from one perspective, yes, it pulls you back from the horror. It's a little chuckle-inducing. It's a little unintentionally hilarious. At the same time, though, if you enjoy the ping pong ball eye monsters, it was a whole lot of fun. At the same time, though, you've got these moments of adorable hilarity mixed in with a middle of the second act that is definitely higher on the intensity scale, at least for me, in terms of what I watched. There's a lot of children in peril, and I know that can be a problem for some. It's loud, lots of screaming, graphic. Some of the kills I've seen worse, but there's a lot of fake blood going on. You see a lot of the kills in detail. So this is one of those examples where I have to say know your limits. What I did really eat up here, though, but it's such a complicated topic for me, was watching Neville Brand just fully committed into this part, fully unhinged. This is a amazingly terrifying portrayal from him. It solidified again just how good Neville Brand is. And honestly, outside of some deep film circles, I don't see him talked about nearly enough. And I think it was a shame that he seems to be pigeonholed quite like he was. This conjures up a bit of a tangent for me. I spent the holiday season watching Laredo, and I watched that and his portrayal of Reese, and they're very silly, very buffoonish, I suppose would be a good word. To watch Laredo compared with the pilot for the series on The Virginian, where Reese is far more grounded, far more real. I don't know if realistic is the right word. A little more Neville Brandy. There's a little evil there. The character was clearly tweaked between the pilot and the series, and it didn't leave Reese with much grounded acting to do. Brand was so good as a heavy, and so good. I've seen him play in a few things, especially at this later point in the 1970s. I'm thinking things like Evils at Night, released in 1985, The Mad Bomber, released in 1973, Bird Eye Gordon, great TV nostalgia cast. That's one to check out if you're into the 1970s weirdness of it all. And Angel's Brigade, another in that camp, and a interesting but very rough, challenging Neville Brand in the 1970s-ish performance. And reading about Brand's past has been insightful, and it would have been interesting to have seen him get more work, especially later in life. I mean, everywhere you dive into him, you see stuff about his personal demons, which is an argument to why things didn't happen. However, the depth and the complexity that he could bring into even the most unhinged of characters. I would have loved to see him get a wider variety of roles. I've been down a deep, deep Neville brand rabbit hole so far this year, and I hope to tick a little bit more off. So definitely send me your Neville brand recommendations if you have them. But getting back to Eaten Alive, it was such a weird but interesting to watch performance from him. And getting back to Hooper's direction, what was really cool to see take shape in this one was the environment. So this is set in a kind of rural Louisiana, we're told, hotel. And diving into some of the Letterboxd reviews really kind of punctuated this as well. The set design and the work to build this world and create what is really something that feels unique and strange and original to the genre, especially at this point. I loved seeing what Hooper was able to do with that. This is a very false isn't the right word. It's very clearly a stage. It's very clearly artificial. But my word, he uses this to incredibly interesting stylistic effects. Different critic that written this before me, the Italian influences in there, thinking back to things like Suspiria and the Italian horror movies, the lighting here is so weird and whimsical, I suppose, and fantastic in a way, but at the same time, sultry. A number of critics reference Tennessee Williams, this sweaty backwoods environment that is so prevalent. This was a fascinating horror watch that I'd yet to dive into, and I certainly need to give this one some deeper thoughts. But Eaten Alive, currently streaming now on Peacock, for those who are interested. Certainly it's one to know your limits, but this was cool as someone who's continually diving into horror, and I look forward to checking out more Tobe Hooper as well. Let's go ahead and bring this one to a close for another week. Thank you for joining me here at Piercing Pop Culture, with episodes available wherever you get your podcasts. I'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode, but until then, feel free to follow me over on Instagram and at Blue Sky, both at kpierce624. I'll have updates as I have them. Thank you all for everything, and we'll talk again soon. Bye all.